10 months ago, last summer, we lost our daughter. She was 18 months old. You have a lot of options as to like how you can move forward. It makes me sad on a daily basis just to think that, you know, there's people that are hopeless out there. And I realized, because it was just like, man, this Bitcoin, if we can all, you know, create local economies based around a global currency of Bitcoin, it's just like taking our 1950s farm approach and time traveling it forward into, you know, 2050, like a 100-year jump. What was once just a further diversification of my portfolio, really all of my savings are now just in Bitcoin. Be your best self, you know, be verifiable in your own life.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Johnathan to the podcast. Johnathan is a Bitcoin advocate and a freeborn farmer. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Johnathan.
Thank you, Paula. It's great to be here. Really excited to visit with you today.
Yeah, and I love your background, and I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about yourself and your Bitcoin journey.
Absolutely. Well, when we moved here to Wyoming, one of the first things that I did was build this bookshelf here. And I've always dreamt of having a house that the walls were just fully bookshelves. I love reading. I love learning, and, you know, just it makes life a lot more vibrant, and you start to put different things that maybe don't seem connected together the more you learn about them, and just creates a real vibrant life.
Yeah, and you're living on a farm. Tell us a little bit about that and about yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, we live here in Wyoming, right along the Wyoming-Colorado border, along the Little Snake River, and we have a small kind of diversified farm that I see as more like to a farm that you would come across in America in the 50s and 60s, where it's not a single stream thing, and we've got multiple different grazing animal species, and we grow hay in an irrigated grass meadow. So it's a regenerative practice where we're really focused on increasing the soil health for long-term yields of native grass species, you know, with the help of that added irrigation water. It's a semi-arid region, and so we don't get enough rain to produce grassland on a natural basis. But we divert from the river in a communal shared canal with about 40 other irrigators on this canal. And so we kind of all share this water resource, work together to make that available to us, and really share it throughout the season. So it really brings us in close connection with our neighbors, and, you know, we really have to work together. That mentality is kind of what drives our farm, is that communal aspect, really wanting to produce our own food for the family, my wife and I. Um, you know, and then with any excess, we really try to make that available to as local of a customer base as possible. And that locality has grown over the years, and now we've got a few 100-mile radius of people that, you know, come to us for pork, beef. We just started getting into sheep last year, so we'll have lamb available. But people really value, I wouldn't say it's organic. We almost do, it's more of a beyond organic approach where we do our best to have no artificial inputs, but we like to focus on local supplies or inputs more so than certified organic that might come farther away. So for us, it's really about being self-sufficient, not only in the food supply, but in that supply chain as well. So the closer we can keep all of our inputs that provide for our outputs, the better in our mind. We call it the Freeborn Farm for a handful of reasons, but primarily we same mentality. We don't like to have external needs as much as we can get away with it. And so we keep full breeding stock, mature male and females of all of our animals, and we do all of our own breeding. And then we raise animals all the way from newborn up to maturity. And then we'll either, you know, send them off to go to the local processors to turn into that food that we can sell, or we pull out select animals to maintain our breeding stock. So we actually have multi generations. The first cow that we had ever bought, we now have. She's still here. She's the herd boss, and we've got her great grandchildren that are actually about to calve this year, and so it's pretty fun. And we really like her and what she brings to the genetics. So it's just a really kind of pleasant environment. We try to give everything the best life possible while they're here, and just really select for that ability to provide healthy and nutritious food to as many people as we can.
Wonderful. Music to my ears. So you mentioned before that you found Bitcoin relatively early. How did Bitcoin fit into your farming journey?
Yeah, well, so I did come across Bitcoin early, but I never tied into it so much to begin with. And it's kind of an interesting story there, because I in my 20s, when Bitcoin was starting to come out, I had heard about it, but I was so freewheeling at that time. I was really into rafting and ski bumming at the time. And so I was just always on the move. I didn't really have a home base very often, and I had a really negative view of the monetary system, um, all the way since high school. It just seemed really unjust and kind of inequitable all along to me. But unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, but to my financial detriment, my approach was to just resist it, resist needing money, resist earning money. And my goal at that time was save up $2,000 so I could have enough gas money to get to different river put-ins, and then just go rafting all summer long, and then the winter would be based on skiing and working as little as possible to make sure I could go rafting all the next summers. I just had a really kind of aesthetic viewpoint of life at that time, and never went after any kind of financial benefits. So that's kind of what took me through all the way up into my 30s, when I was like, well, I guess I need to, I went to grad school. I studied hydrology and water management, and then started working on a PhD in social ecology to learn kind of how humans relate to their natural resources and how that relationship changes over time. And after getting those degrees, I moved into the workforce, I guess, and kind of got my first full-time work. And so that kind of brought me out of that freewheeling lifestyle. And around that time, I started to think more deeply about Bitcoin, but I had a fairly diversified like investment portfolio. I was fortunate that a grandparent had put money in a Roth IRA when I was born, and so I had started to manage that throughout my 20s, and turned what was a pretty small investment into a fairly a reasonable size portfolio for my age at that time. And it was really interesting to me because I chose stocks based on what I saw the effects of society from a particular company. So I was always really invested in the NASDAQ and these tech stocks, because it was just fascinating to me, like how these things filtered their way in. And, you'd see things like the Internet of Things would come up. And at first, no one really knew what we were talking about. But it's like, yeah, we need to connect our devices, we need to have things talking to each other. And so it gave me this really kind of intimate view of social evolution. And that's what I based all my investments on, was just, where is society going? What things are we interested in? What things are just inevitable for us? And that's where I found out more about Bitcoin as a diversified investment. And so at first, back in probably about 2020, I made an investment in Bitcoin with about the same exact amount as I would have put towards, say Nvidia when I first started hearing about it, or, when you think of like, yeah, I'll throw some money at Google or something, it was just a small amount, kind of see how it goes. And then I forgot about it because it wasn't on my, I'd go on to Schwab, which is where my accounts are, and it wasn't there. So I just kind of forgot about it, and it sat there for years until about 2023. when it started to show up a little bit more into the news and like the media was kind of talking just a little bit about it, and some of these other altcoins were coming up. And at that time, I was like, oh, I think I have some of that. And it was on Coinbase. And so I went and looked and I was like, oh, wow, like this is really increased a lot. I wish I had put more into it. And that's when I decided, well, I better start putting more into it now. And so I started moving some more investments there. And to be honest, I got looking into some of these altcoins too. And that was, after the COVID era where like Dogecoin was doing all of its crazy stuff and, you're just seeing these enormous gains. I was not involved at that time, but I had the idea that, well, if I invest a little bit in these altcoins and get 1,000% increase, I'll move it into Bitcoin. And it was this kind of thing like all roads lead to Bitcoin kind of mentality. And I did that for about 3 months, 4 months, and then realized that as a trader, I'm terrible. I get really stressed out. I start just like like looking at it constantly and wondering when I can get out to just get it into Bitcoin. And so at like 2023 and a half, maybe early 2024, I decided that's just not my style. It gets my heart rate running too much. I just want to put it where it's going to end up, and trying to get, 200% gain here so I can buy a little bit more Bitcoin. It's like you're almost betting that Bitcoin stays down while these go up. And I just said, no, I'm just going to go straight to Bitcoin from now on. And so that's what I started to do. And I just put any new investment money I might have had straight to Bitcoin. And as I started to do that, I started to read more books, started to get more active on X, and just started to learn more about it, the whole kind of just study Bitcoin mentality. And I realized and kind of kicked myself because it was just like, man, this this Bitcoin is the answer to all of this distaste that I had for, the fiat and like the global economies and global colonization and cultural appropriation and destruction of indigenous ways of knowing, all those things that I just looked so down on from our use of this fiat currency and these globalized economies. It was like Bitcoin was sitting there all this time and I never studied it. And so I didn't understand how it really fit into that worldview. So I guess from about 2023 and a half, I've been a Bitcoin maxi and just fully invested in what was once just a further diversification of my portfolio, is now what all of my investments and really all of my savings are now just in Bitcoin. I have my retirement accounts are in strategy, the new 21 capital, and some of these just like IBIT and stuff like that, but all just Bitcoin leveraged in the retirement accounts, and then cold storage Bitcoin for the rest of it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that. So you did also go into cold storage
I
Bitcoin.
love self sovereignty. Like, I'm just such a sucker. You could get me to do anything if you told me it was in the name of sovereignty, or freedom. So I'm just like, yeah, let's do that. Um, and so I did that pretty early on, kind of as soon as I started moving, more money into that. It was clear to me that it needed to be held in self custody, and just the importance of that and keeping your own seed phrases. uh, as a farmer, we do a lot of cash business on our sales, and so holding a fair amount of your own wealth is not unfamiliar to us. I know for a lot of people that's kind of like this big scary step. What if I lose it? What if I do something wrong? But we were the classic, like shoebox of cash. You have just a year's worth of on farm sales just sitting there, and that felt really good. And we just don't have that anymore. It's all go to the bank, go to the exchange, go to cold storage. So
That's wonderful. You mentioned that you love self sovereignty, and being a farmer, you're self sovereign with your food, with your health, and now you're also self sovereign with Bitcoin, which is wonderful. Are there any other things that farming and Bitcoin have in common?
absolutely. And to me, I think that like I just described that kind of Bitcoin journey, the Bitcoin was almost the end point for me. You know, it was like the bow on top of it all. The farming lifestyle and kind of before that, the like nomadic, you know, just freewheeling lifestyle. It was really all about just a distaste for the consumerism that's so rampant in society. The really like kind of short view of things. And so I think that in starting to study Bitcoin and reading, you know, the Bitcoin Standard, and that was the first book I read, and I really enjoyed learning more about that low time preference approach to life. And that immediately just jumped to me, and I was like, wow, that is my life. That's what I've been going for all along, is, you know, this appreciation for those, like the craftsman approach to things. That's something that's really stood out to me even before we were farming with profit. Even before we did that and just had a couple of dairy goats and just for our own use and chickens and things, I got really into the idea of like timber framing and, you know, these old kind of joining techniques and doing carpentry all by hand with hand tools. And so I had started to make just some furniture for the house, and like I made like our dining room table. And my entire goal was just, I'm not going to use a single powered tool for this. You know, I'm going to do it all by hand. And it was just this idea that I just wanted to know. I wanted to know what it took to do something by hand, because every new product that comes out is always comes with this promise of it's going to save you time, it's going to give you more convenience, you're going to have more time in your life. But I don't see anyone that has time in their life. So, you know, they keep selling us this same promise of more time, more convenient. It makes life easier. Spend more time with your family. I don't see anyone actually achieving those results from it. So I wanted to really, and it's what brought me into farming too. I just wanted to see, what am I giving up by just blindly, you know, buying your convenience here. And I found that you give up a lot, you know, you give up your pride, you give up a sense of accomplishment, you give up a sense of autonomy, or, you know, or self sufficiency, really. And so that low time preference idea is something that I had already been practicing. I just never heard that term before. And so when I started to study Bitcoin, it just, everything just meshed up, and it was just like, this has just been waiting for me. And it was just no question at that point that it was the right thing to do. And I feel like it's actually furthered my desire to kind of critique my own operation, to find, you know, what are other areas that maybe I'm not practicing, you know, a low time preference. Or if I rushed through this, it happens all the time, I rushed through this project to get to the next one, and now I'm paying for it. You know, I threw this thing up really fast for just, I needed it right now, but then I learned I need it a year later still, and it's falling apart, you know? And so it's just made me rethink everything, and given me a good metric to kind of assess and audit my own lifestyle that way. And by putting all of our money into Bitcoin savings, we don't have that cash that you can just like pull $100 bill out and go to town and, you know, do that. So, you know, we're kind of even more careful with our savings than we were before that way.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned that the stocks were making you nervous and it just made sense for you to be in a sound money that appreciates in value.
Hmm.
You said, do you want to comment on that?
No, no, go ahead. You're right. It just doesn't suit my style.
But you said that you had a feeling a way back that there was something wrong with the monetary system. What gave you that indication?
You know, when I grew up, um, I had a good upbringing. So I grew up in suburban landscape. My mom stayed home and raised the kids, and my dad was an engineer, and you know, he'd leave and come home every day, and it always kind of looked like a bit of a slog to me. And the thing that really hit me though is my dad was hired. He's just got that kind of quantitative mindset, 100%. And he was hired after his first year of college, I think, by Westinghouse to come and be a nuclear technician. and my entire upbringing, that's what his job was. And so when I was in high school, my dad, Westinghouse, they said, we want you to be an engineer, you're valuable to the company. So he started going to night school and got his bachelor's degree when I was, in high school. He had already been working for them for probably 25 years or more. And as soon as he got that degree, he became an engineer, he got a raise. And in my mind, it gave me a very negative view of both the education system and of the professional compensation world, because he'd been doing this for all this time. The experience and the knowledge was there, but this piece of paper that certified him in that way was what increased his value. And so in high school, when I was already questioning a lot of these like establishment things, and I was a middle child, and so I just had such an anti-establishment view, and I got in a lot of trouble because of it. But I was already in that mindset, and then to see that and just wonder, well, what did that matter? Why were you held back all this time until this one kind of social metric was met, and then all of a sudden you're valuable? And so it just seemed to me very arbitrary from that view. And that combined with kind of the slog in and out of the house, is just kind of like, no, that doesn't seem to add up so well. People should be valued for who they are, not what letters or pieces of paper are attached to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then to be on the treadmill, always trying to just make enough money to keep up with the cost of living and inflation.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where, you just, and as you study Bitcoin, you learn that you're just losing. Even if you're getting those raises, you're actually just losing money on the long term. And I hate to see people feel hopeless. Like that's just one of the worst things in my mind. It makes me sad on a daily basis just to think that, there's people that are hopeless out there, and there's a lot of atrocities that go on in the world that are just truly despicable. And I think about them, but in this sense, I'm thinking about those people that do actually have a good quality of life. And, you have a home, and you have food in your fridge, and you have a family, and you have entertainment that you enjoy. But that hopelessness to me is just unforgivable. It's just like you cannot have all that you need and still be hopeless. That's what the fiat system does to people. And it's inexcusable to me that people can put that on a society.
Yeah, I agree. And that brings me to, you live such a positive life and you look for the good. And I know you share it on X, which is where I met you, all your wonderful animals and the things that you do daily. And I know you and your family have gone through some tragedy. Tell us why you chose to share about this and how you've been coping.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so about, I guess now 10 months ago, last summer, we lost our daughter. She's 18 months old on a like really just a tragic accident here on the farm. It was just a life-shattering moment, 100%, and I can think every second of that day from the time I woke up, and it was all just like any other day until it just wasn't all of a sudden, and it becomes just a whole turning point in your life. And having experienced that, you have a lot of options as to like how you can move forward from something like that. And we're lucky that we live in a small rural community, right, here where there's only about 600 people in this valley. Everyone knows each other, and they're very supportive because that's how these agricultural kind of remote communities are. You don't have a lot of resources available, so people really look out for each other. And also people have similar shared tragedies. And I always remember that next morning, a neighbor who lost his son as a teenager probably about 10 years ago. I mean, it was like I can picture it, just this dust cloud. We live on a dirt road, and this dust cloud like coming around the bends, and this truck just blasts up into our driveway and kind of like screeches to a halt. and this neighbor gets out, and and he's got tears in his eyes, and he just knew exactly how we were feeling. And he just gave us the biggest hug and talked to us about how difficult it was for him to try and keep out the a feeling of bitterness and resentment, to the world, to God, to everything. It's so easy to allow that. That's almost the default. If you don't do something, that's going to be the default, is just this total bitterness and resentment. And as soon as that darkness sets into your heart, it's going to stay there. And the longer you let it be there, the harder it is, up to the level of it just being impossible to get it to ever leave. So that was really powerful, and that was right away that we heard that from him. After that, we kept having more and more people, like, it's just people going about their business, going up and down the county road that kind of runs through our property, and people would see us out and they'd stop and share condolence and things. And so we just really immediately started to feel this support that comes from community. And then people would tell us, we're praying for you, we're thinking about you every day, we think about you. And we started to feel that. I'd never felt that before. My anti-establishment views had led me away from an upbringing in organized religion long ago, and I'd struggled to make sense of like spirituality versus religion and how the two can kind of fit and how does it fit into my life. I had always struggled with that. But as these people came and were telling us these things, it was the first time I just felt a tangible support from thought and prayer, which are same thing, really. And so we felt that, and I started to pray every night. And it was because I knew for a certain fact that I, as a human, did not have the strength to hold myself up by myself. My wife and I, we decided we're going to be there for each other. We're going to stay together. We have more love to give in this world, and we just need to be there for each other. And same thing, we also knew it's like the two of us didn't have the strength needed. It'd be so easy just to commiserate. And so, both of us started to ask for help from above and accept the help from our neighbors. And in that relationship of prayer and seeking positivity and strength, the more you do it, the more tangible it becomes. And the more you start to just understand that there really is, I guess I mean, it's not physical, but so it must be a metaphysical support structure that is available and that exists, that can bring you peace and maybe not understanding, but acceptance. So you really had to learn before anything, just acceptance. The first day or two was just disbelief. I mentioned on Stacy's Bitcoin Nova podcast that next morning, like seeing the sun come up, that was just like the most perverse sight, like in my mind. Like I'd never seen anything so offensive. It was just like, how could the world just go on? It's like my world's over. So how is the sun coming up and birds are chirping and like we need to go and milk cows? It's just like, how are any of you going about this? So you just learn this acceptance. You learn to not only accept the bad, but accept the good, and say the universe wants us to succeed. The universe wants us to learn from every potential experience in our life and make something of it. So for us, I think both of us, we felt that support from our neighbors, our community, from a God in the most like general sense of the word. And we both kind of felt that for whatever reason, and I think a big part of it's our natural diet, our lifestyle, our daily exercise on the farm, the needing to go out and be responsible for our animals and give them care. All of this like was a sense of purpose, a healthy diet, activity and exercise in our lives, being in nature and seeing what that first day seemed so perverse, then turned into a life goes on, and it has to, and it does for everything. So because of all those things, and for whatever reason, we had the strength to survive that and to be able to give each other support and to accept support from others. And we just really felt this need to like be there for other people who may have had similar tragedies, or people like we were saying before who may haven't had a tragedy but feel this hopelessness in their life. So that was a real calling, and when I got on X, it was to learn more about Bitcoin because I kind of understood that that's where it was being discussed and talked about. And so I came on at first just trying to learn about Bitcoin and talk about Bitcoin and try to sound smart enough to ask the right questions to people, when you didn't know what you're talking about. And that was great. It got me a good foot in the door, but then I made it my own and I started sharing more about the farm. And like we were talking about before, like seeing all these similarities of our lifestyle with the low time preference approach and the proof of work and the self sovereignty. And so I just started kind of using the farm as a metaphor for Bitcoin and just trying to make little parables that way. And I found that people really liked it, and it seemed to like bring a lot of happiness to people who don't have that in their lives, or are living in a congested area with high population densities and don't have access to these things. I remember one of the first times I posted about the farm, um, someone, and I wish I remember who it was, but someone replied back or shared it and said, "Look, it's not just computer nerds that are, interested in Bitcoin." And I thought that was really funny. And it was just like, yeah, no, this is a universally applicable thing. This has true utility for all of us. And so after that, now I almost don't talk as much about Bitcoin. I just try to put out positive messaging that I think is inherently connected to Bitcoin, but just be your best self, you know, be verifiable in your own life. Let your actions match up with your words and your lifestyle and just be a verifiable positive entity because no one else is going to instill that in you. And if you don't believe in yourself, why would anyone else believe in you? You've got to be, you got to build your own chain and let others into it as well. And it just adds so much value to your life.
Well, you have a really powerful message. And I know we all love seeing your farm and your animals and your daily life on X. And I know some of the communities are really important to you. Is that because that's where you find your Bitcoin community, or are there also some Bitcoin farmers in your area, or are you the Bitcoin farmer?
I guess in my area, I am the Bitcoin farmer. I talk to a lot of people about it, and there's a lot of skepticism. But there are some other ranchers that I do know. They're not directly in my area, but some that actually kind of talked about it with me before I started going all in. And I've gone back and talked to them since and just been like, I just need you to know, like, I'm full on with this stuff now. I think it fits so perfectly. The initial, like Satoshi's initial ideas of like peer-to-peer transactions, without third parties. It's on my pinned post. It just says stack sats and eat local. And to me, the two fit together so well, and it's a complete decentralization and a disarmament of the power structure. If we can all create local economies based around a global currency of Bitcoin where we can interact directly with each other, I mean, it's just like taking our 1950s farm approach and time traveling it forward into 2050, like a 100-year jump. And one of the things I always like to say is, feet on the ground, head in the chain is the kind of the place to be. And so I feel like it can bring us back to a modern version of that time period when we were on sound money, and every family had a bit of self sufficiency to them, and you had to rely on your neighbors and your local economy for your own support, and it makes us value each other more. And I just think there's been a real deliberate attempt to make us be distrustful of our neighbors, hateful of our neighbors, scared of our neighbors. And like I was describing with our situation with our daughter, if it weren't for our neighbors and the love that they shared with us, it's like I just don't know where we would be. So to me, you got to just build local community, and that local community has to have its own interconnected economy that ties you all together. And what better way than Bitcoin to support that?
I agree. I see you in the future having a circular economy among the farmers because I hear that people do that with apps like Fedi and other apps that are coming, and it is possible. Are you accepting Bitcoin as payment or hoping to get there one day?
We are willing to accept Bitcoin as payment. Over the winter is kind of where I started to focus more on that aspect of it. And in the wintertime, we're really just doing business with our neighbors and like very local communities. So there's not a lot of it. But this year, we're going to start taking our products to farmers markets. And so we're going to be over in Laramie, Wyoming, and at their farmers market this summer. I know that they get a lot of traffic from the Front Range of Colorado, like Fort Collins and things like that. And I'm working on having some like kind of marketing materials, so that it'll be really evident that we do that. I hope it's successful. If nothing else, though, I just see it as kind of like a fun experiment to see who does get attracted by that, or who starts to ask some questions about, what is this thing? I hear about it. So I see it even if no one's interested in converting a Bitcoin to grass-fed beef or something like that. It might offer a good opportunity to have great conversations and just kind of see how people are feeling about it.
Absolutely. What is some of the most impactful books that you've read on Bitcoin that have helped your journey?
I I love the Bitcoin Standard, I think is where a lot of people start, and that is where I started. To me I like the big picture aspects of it, cuz to me it's a lifestyle choice, and it's the way that it meshes in with my other lifestyle choices that interest me. So more than kind of the monetary and fiscal, economics of it, I really like that idea, like the historical aspect of money, where it went wrong, and how Bitcoin can potentially like fill some of those error gaps. So the Bitcoin Standard was great. I've heard from some folks on X that have recommended to me that Fiat Standard, and I'd like to maybe do that next because they talk about how it really gets more into how the Fiat Standard allowed like big pharma, big ag to really develop, and that stuff just disgusts me. So I know I would really be interested in learning more about it. I'm working my way through the big print right now, and that kind of is a little more detailed on the financial and like monetary stuff, but it's been really interesting. I think that was a good follow up to the Bitcoin Standard, just to be able to get like a little more detailed information on the things that are kind of alluded to in the bigger picture from the standard. So those two have been really great. But otherwise, I'm wanting to get more into some of the spiritual writings. There's just some really fascinating stuff that people are talking about and working on, that have like the celestial connections, like almost like Bitcoin's horoscope kind of stuff. I just find that stuff to be really interesting all the time. And I start to wonder, I am a Capricorn. Bitcoin is a Capricorn, and I wonder if that was a deliberate decision by Satoshi because of like kind of those characteristics of like proof of work and determination, and kind of that material kind of drive that Capricorns can have. So I find that to be really interesting, but people are expanding those ideas to where I just barely understand them, but it's something I want to really dive into more, because I feel like, the more that we can incorporate the ideals of Bitcoin into our own like spiritual quest, to me that's what builds conviction. The financial policy, the monetary and economic stuff, that builds a fiscal conservatism and an awareness that Bitcoin's a good investment, and that's great. But what makes me hold it, or and not even look at the price much anymore, and just know this is a good thing, it's that kind of spiritual engagement where this is an inevitable. earth-shattering technology that we're so early in, and if we can fully adopt it, it's going to just solve so many of those problems that the fiat system has created. So that's kind of where I want to be moving more, is into that kind of spiritual aspects of it. And it ties into my social ecology background. It's, I want to understand how humans relate to things. And so I want to know how we as a species and as individual cultures tie this kind of technological development into our lives.
Yeah, I love the spiritual side too. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you think it's spiritual. I'll just tell you, for me, it was that once you have enough time, then you have time to look inwards a little bit. Then you realize, like you said, it's not just about me and my family, it's about everybody. I want everybody to do well, not just me. That's why we do these podcasts, to get the word out. And also, it can change the world for the better. It can help everybody. So, yeah, I always say Bitcoin itself's not spiritual, but it has that spiritual nudge towards something better for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the same things that have been removed from our lives by the fiat standard, and by adopting these high time preference, mentalities and lifestyles of immediate, we live in a world of just hyper addiction. And that's what consumption to me looks like. It's immediate reward that's so fleeting. It's back to that thing. This is going to change your life. Your whole life's going to be better for this. But in reality, by the time you get home, you're already looking for, the next thing to get that fix from. And I think that when humans, and this another tie in to farming, the industrial agriculture system, you keep animals kind of in fear, slightly stressed out, slightly hungry, always needing something, because then they're easy to manipulate and control. How else do you get animals to go from like a concentrated feedlot into these narrow chutes to a commercial industrial slaughterhouse? If they're not just terrified and stressed out and willing to just run any direction you point them. I see just a heck of a lot of similarities to that form of agriculture, to how our populations are managed. And so, if we were to be able to shift our governance structures to more similar to how we go about our farming, with like a regenerative approach. We want a healthy environment that creates healthy animals. We try to raise happy animals because they end up tasting better. They're not full of stressed out hormones and cortisol and all these things. So when we get pushed into this high time preference mentality, this really addictive lifestyle where nothing has lasting benefit to you, and you're just constantly trying to just survive to get to the next day, you don't really have a lot of time for self reflection, which then leads to, you know, I think self awareness, and and then that can lead to a sense of pride and accomplishment. So what I see with a sound currency, sound money, low time preference, when you go back in time and you see the things that people built, you see the way that they built them and the pride that was put into it. Someone might spend their entire life building a cathedral or working on a particular work of art or something like that. And that's just what they did. That was what they spent their time all day doing. And you just have such a sense of accomplishment and an achievement. And when you have that, you also open yourself up to inspiration, from the muse, whatever that may be. But that's something that every night when I pray for, and what I ask for myself, is just inspiration. Just give me inspiration so that I will know what the right things to follow are, like the right paths to go down. I've started any little fleeting thought that pops into my head. I really try to like kind of grasp a hold of that and then dig into it further, and see if that's something that, benefits. And it could be something as simple as like just earthworms in the soil or something like that. And then, how that's a metric for soil health, and how soil health is a metric for global health. And it just builds and builds until you're really like seeing the world in like a magical, interconnected thing that you wouldn't want to poison any aspect of. And so to me, that's where, like, that's like spiritual enlightenment. It tells you that you are a intrinsic part of this world. We can't do without you. You're here for a reason. You're doing things that no one else can do. And I just posted that last night. It was just like, no one thinks or acts like you do. And I say that to every single person on X. It's just like you wake up and think things and say things and do things that no one else in the world could think or say or do. And that should be so magical to you. That should be so uplifting every day. So that's where I just see, like, if we can get back to having the ability to be valued for our outcomes and our outputs and take pride in those things, then you start to take pride in other people's accomplishments too. And it's just love just gets spread. But, if we don't love ourselves, you can't share it, and you can't really love other people either. So, and I think it's hard for addicts to love themselves. And so when our society is trying to turn us all into really high time preference addicts of consumption, it takes away our ability to love ourselves. We also see, like, kind of a distancing from spirituality. And there's a big talk of, if you're not an expert, this made me so upset recently. It seems like there's a new mantra: if you're not an expert, you don't have a right to talk about something. And I keep hearing this more and more, and it's just like, that's not okay. No, it goes back to that thing of, like, you're the only one who can think like you do, and we need to hear your thoughts on anything, no matter what they are. If it challenges our own, then it furthers my conviction or gives me an opportunity to further defend mine, or it helps me to knock down preconceptions that aren't justified in my own life. But we need to hear those things, and we just need to learn to love ourselves. And I think without something you can be proud of in your life, it's going to be very hard to do that.
Yeah, I really love your message, and I hope you keep getting it out there. I know more people are going to interview you. What I'm hearing there is that we all are individual and different, and each person is valuable, but we're also all connected on a consciousness level in some way. And when we stack sats and start to get a little more time freedom, we can find our true purpose. We can at least look.
Absolutely. And I just love what, that individualism within a greater, higher being. I've kept bees. I don't have them right now, but I've kept bees for a long time, and I am just fascinated by superorganisms, that these colony structures. And one of the things with humans that I see, that leads to our social development constantly, is our speed of communication, right? It's like, as we've developed new technologies to communicate across space, it begins to tie us all together, more instantaneously. And that's, now we have, these social medias that, talking about X, you can put out a message, and, some of these bigger accounts will reach a million people all at once. And, that wasn't possible, back when it was, first, like, Pony Express here in America, like Pony Express, and then Telegraph, and then, communal phone line stuff. But it's just like we've just gotten faster and faster with communication. And there could come a time where, we hit that superorganism status, because we're just kind of, we're in tune with each other. And again, that ties right back into that spiritual aspect. We need to get rid of a lot of these distractions. And I think that, that being in tune, and if you're on a positive frequency, being in tune with each other will allow us to kind of reach a whole new renaissance of ability and creative thought, and communal progress. Really, that's got to go hand in hand. You can't just have sound money with all the rest is the exact same. It's gotta be a whole social kind of reconstruction that does value individuality, but for the good of the group and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. So, for our last question, besides low time preference and self sovereignty, How has Bitcoin changed you most?
It has driven me more towards this, it's a sense of community. It really is. I think fiat is a selfish, hungry hippos kind of game, of let's grab as much as we possibly can because, if I don't, I'm going to be a total slave. And it's basically like, you just got to struggle to not be. It's like a musical chairs combined with hungry hungry hippos, and you don't want to, it's like grab as much as you can or else you're going to be left standing out at the end. So with Bitcoin, finding the X community has been really positive, and like I said, how that communal aspect has taken away any concern for short-term changes in price. It's just, as I've said, it's just put total conviction in my soul about this is good, no question, this is good. And then the actual structure of Bitcoin supports that too. And right now there's a lot of way over my head discussion, but of these kind of node issues, and between like the Bitcoin core and then the two that I'm aware of is like that and knots, and how that we can each individually be running these nodes that make up that whole system. And so Bitcoin has this kind of super colony or super organism colony kind of structure to it, and it's those things that the structure of Bitcoin starts to mesh in with the structure of these universal frequencies and this interconnectedness that, again, in my mind, it just builds complete and total conviction of just like there are natural processes at play here that Satoshi, who knows if he saw it get to that point. If he or she did, I mean, that is just absolutely amazing. And the forward thinking ability of that could almost only come from like time travel at that point. But that communal aspect, it's funny because Bitcoin gives us the opportunity to have self sovereignty and be our own banks kind of thing, but it also gives us the opportunity as an individual to strengthen the entire network. And so I can not only do my little hungry hippo thing and hide it, but I can also work to make sure that everyone else's stack is all that much safer, all that much secure. And so you get that communal aspect. It's like we need to we our society structure needs to be following the Bitcoin design. And I think that that is what will lead us to just, much more fulfillment and happiness and ability to spread love if we do that.
I love that you brought up the nodes too. That's something that we can all do to strengthen the network. And also, just on the bees, they say that if bees go extinct, we go extinct. So we can see why they're so important. And just give a shout out to your communities on X because I know you're strong in the community.
Yeah, I first found and was welcomed into the Bitcoin Army. That's a great group. If you feel like you're shouting into the void on X, you got to get over to the Bitcoin Army. Like we will lift you up, and I mean, we just love hearing from anyone on there, and it's the most positive group of people. It's just a ton of fun and also awesome information, like quantitative, qualitative, and just entertainment. It's all there. I also really like the paranoid Bitcoin anarchist. That's where I'll just like if it's something that's a little more aggressive than I need to share on the Bitcoin Army, I'll go and do some spitting over there about like kind of end the Fed kind of stuff. And then really recently, a newer group is the Satoshis, which is a group of women Bitcoiners. And I just love the energy that comes out of that group
Are
so
you an
much.
honorary member of the Satoshis?
Yeah, well, they recently opened it up to all genders, and so um, I I was like immediate, yeah, sign me up. I was just kind of on the sidelines supporting, but they are so creative, and it just has that feminine energy that's so different than the masculine that kind of can run the financial side of things a lot of times. And so that's just been like really refreshing. There's a lot of creativity and just what I think are the right ideas that we need to bring society into that kind of Bitcoin mentality and tying that back to the farm. To me, on the farm, fertility and mothering instincts are what keep us in business. It's what gives all the value to us. And so on a day-to-day basis, that's what we're trying to improve constantly is like fertility of the land, caring and nurturing instincts. And that's what I'm seeing in that Satoshi's is just, it is a fertile landscape for new ideas to flourish from. So Bitcoin Army, Paranoid Bitcoin, anarchists, and Satoshis are kind of where I spend most of my time these days.
Wonderful. So shout out to all of those. Yes, and I'm part of those too. And I started a group called the Bit Souls, and it's focused on the spiritual side. However, I don't post very much because I'm always editing or doing something here. But when I remember, and any of my guests that say something spiritually related to Bitcoin, I post. So I'll learn from those groups and keep going with it for
And
now.
Paula, I will I joined that spaces the other day and I loved that conversation. And I should have even mentioned that, but I will try to, as these thoughts keep developing in my head, I'll try to be a lot more active on that one too. Cause I just love that. When you first started it, I was like, I need to be on there. But yeah, I'm not quite as active as on those others.
That's okay. I know we all have limited time. We'll just keep moving forward. And I really appreciate you coming on today, Johnathan. It was fantastic talking to you. And I will post a link to your X account. Is there anywhere else people can find you?
No, that's all. I haven't been on social media, and so that's kind of that's my one place I spend time.
Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.